I really thought both Rose Lavelle and Hina Sagita were fantastic this year. This is another one where you say, feels kind of notable that there's no Gotham player here. I think that the Gotham midfield, and this was reflected in my best 11, front to back was very good. And that is interesting because it hasn't really been a great year for defenses. It hasn't really been a great year for defensive midfields. And I felt like Gotham was one of the most balanced possible options. And I had Neely Martin on my best 11 for that reason, because I wanted to put a defensive midfielder in there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. We're on the NWSL train, and it is still going. We're going to talk through all of the end of season award nominations. We're going to compare my ballot to what the consensus came to. I'm going to give you my final list and who I am voting for all of the major end of season awards, because it was an incredible year for individual performances. And then we're going to do a quick preview of each individual NWSL semifinal. I'm going to give my predictions, as poor as they might be, so tune in for that. And then, we're just going to get ready for a crazy week next week at NWSL Championship. There's a lot to jump into. Let's dig in. All right, so today seemed like the day. We're taking kind of a deep breath in between the quarterfinal and the semifinal round of the NWSL postseason. It's going to be all eyes towards championship next weekend. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to break down the individual NWSL award finalists. I think this is something that other people have done as well, but I always think this is really fun. It's also nice for me because I did actually have a media vote. I do actually have had that for a number of years as a member of the NWSL Media Association. Quickly, to kind of talk about the context of which these individual awards we get to this finalist group, and also what this means for the percentages for the final tally. Some leagues and people who have familiarity with other American sports leagues or sports league in general know that sometimes there's a media award and an industry award, right? Where there you might have like a players award, like the FIFPro best 11, that's voted on by players, or you have the media award, something like the Ballon d'Or, right? That's a media award. For NWSL at the end of the season, they do a mix of all of it together. So there is a percentage of media that contributes to this. There's a percentage of coaches and GMs and players, and then also fans. Fans actually get to vote on this as well, especially once you get to this finalist shortlist. You can vote on that. That goes into the tally as well. So just to kind of break that down. So yes, for me as a part of media, I take this very seriously, but it is not itself a media vote, which is just a little bit different than some other leagues. So the preliminary round, which I will be talking about here kind of in depth, and then also breaking down my final picks, uses a weighted scale of players for 50% of the vote, owners, coaches, and GMs for 25%, and media for 25%. The final vote itself will be a weighted scale of players, which is 40%, owner, GMs, coaches, 25%, media, 25%, and fans, 10%. So no one kind of portion of things is going to sway these results either way, which I actually think is kind of nice. It hopefully gets you closest to a consensus. But this hasn't always been true, right? We've talked about in the past some of the issues that NWSL end of season awards have had, where maybe it feels like someone's getting an award for the Olympic or World Cup performance that they gave, or someone's front of mind because of their international performances, or there's a difficulty in kind of separating out some of these more famous players or star players that have kind of a greater weight in the domestic consciousness versus players who were actually playing really well in the NWSL week in and week out. But something that's been really, really nice, and we saw this last year and saw it this year, is these new regular season breaks that the NWSL takes to allow players to go off and do international duty. And if they do miss a game or two, it's not an insane amount of missed time. They come back and they can impact games after they come back from their great major tournaments. That makes things a lot easier, because sometimes, and we saw this in these short lists, the best players are some of the most notable players. They are players who excel for their international teams. That makes sense, right? You play really well in your domestic league, you're going to become possibly an international star. But it was also valid because we were able to see that breadth of experience in the regular season, despite players having to step out. Now, not to say that the Olympics didn't impact things, right? The Olympics certainly seemed to impact, like maybe you say Sophia Smith's fitness at the end of this regular season, or even a star like Barbara Banda, who slowed down a little bit in her goal scoring later in the year. You wonder if some of that is just the toll that's taken of going off to the Olympics and coming back and having to be in and out. But I do just like that if you see a player like, let's say, for example, Trinity Rodman, who is excelling for both club and for country, that can all, you're not utilizing someone's international prowess towards these votes, but they are getting time to be in form with their teams. So I like this list. I think that this short list is we're close to consensus here. I think there are a couple of snubs and we'll talk about that, but it was nice to kind of look at this. And I was reading some of my colleagues and kind of their breakdowns, and I did not consult anything before voting, but very similar. I think we all had some similar ideas of who the top performers were, and I like that. That feels good. So let's talk through it. We're going to start with MVP. Let's start with the big one, the MVP finalists. So these are the finalists that you can now vote on for MVP for the NWSL in 2024. Those finalists are Barbara Banda, Temwa Chawinga, Marta, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith. That's very close to actually my personal shortlist. My personal shortlist was Chawinga, Banda, Rodman, Emily Sams, and Smith. With those players available, my final ballot going into, I actually voted this morning, is that same order, but I inserted Marta instead of Sams because there is tiered voting for each of these finalists. I have no problem with Marta being the player in this MVP shortlist versus Sams. I think similar thinking, right? You're looking at the best team in the league, classic situation where that team has a number of very worthy players. I think for me, and this, you're going to see this throughout, I like a balanced ballot. So my vote for Defender of the Year is probably always going to be on my MVP shortlist. I don't think it would take something pretty radical for someone to get a number one Defender of the Year vote from me and not make it into my top 5 players list. That doesn't seem, it seems like you're then kind of siloing each individual award, right? So that's why I put Sams instead of Marta, but I think Marta is a fabulous addition. And I think we've always talked about how it's probably a 2-player race. I liked what Rodman did this season. She was the focal point for the second best team in the league. I thought her attacking numbers flourished, especially if you look at kind of the differences in the way their attack works this season. You take Ashley Sanchez out of the mix, Rodman really steps up. I think that she just had a fantastic year in the stats to support that. And Smith, I did put Smith on there. Like I said, she was on my short list as well. She was 5th, but she was not only one of the best players in the league this year, but she also gets a little bit of an extra weight for me because Portland just simply does not make the playoffs without her. So it's kind of MVP upon MVP, right? Of saying that this player is not only, again, one of the best, but also just her impact on the field for her team was probably the difference between 6th and I don't even know, like 10th. I'm not entirely sure. So I liked putting Smith on there as well, while also understanding that she was not as close to like that first pick that I had as maybe she was to being off the list entirely, right? So who do I have first? Who did I like literally vote for MVP? Temwa Chawinga. She was my number 1 pick, both in the preliminary round and in the final round of voting. It was really between her and Banda for me. They're both incredible goal scorers. Chawinga's consistency, especially in the latter half of the season, really stood out. As we know, she broke single season scoring record, and she just continued to perform week after week after week. She performed against every single team in the league, right? That consistency really stuck out for me. If you look about sort of their underlying contributions that aren't just goal scoring, Banda is probably the better playmaker. Banda is probably a little bit more of a collaborative player in terms of passing, but Chawinga's defensive numbers were also really impressive. So you could even see that, I think, in this postseason game, though obviously we're not voting on postseason, but how important she is not only to the way Kansas City scores, but also to the way that they play defense. And that kind of two-way player really sticks out to me. Kansas City relies on her so heavily. Orlando has the wins, right? They are the Shield winners. So I do understand if someone said best player on the best team goes to Barbara Banda. But conceptually, I think for me, Chawinga is this year's MVP. I would be probably surprised if that did not go in that direction when the ultimate vote comes out. But that's my logic. So I think what you're looking at with Banda versus Chawinga is 2 very well-rounded players in different ways. Like I said, Chawinga kind of follows up with that defensive prowess, how important it is for her to get stuck in on the other end, and how they utilize her as an outlet to play defense as well as offense. Banda, I think you could say, immediately came in as a collaborative player. She came in the middle of the first half of the season and immediately made an impact. And she was on the best team. She was the premier player on the best team in the league. I think you can look at that both ways. I went with Chawinga. Moving on to Defender of the Year. That finalist list was Naomi Girma, Kaylee Kurtz, Tara McEwen, Emily Sams, and Kylie Strum. My ballot was actually a little bit different, not completely, but some slight changes. I did have Emily Sams. I had Abby Dahl-Kemper, Kaylee Kurtz, Tierna Davidson, and Kylie Strum. With the players available from the finalist list, my Defender of the Year number 1 vote was for Emily Sams, and then past that was Kurtz, Strum, McEwen, and Girma. This is the one where we start to talk about snubs. And I'm a big believer that if you're going to talk about putting players on a list, you got to talk about who you're taking off of it, right? think it's very easy to say, oh, this player should have been on this list or this player should have been on this list. And I go, okay, great. Who should they be in there over? I think sometimes, especially in women's sports, people are afraid to actually take the second half of that statement, right? I think this list needs a Gotham player on it. And mine did have a Gotham player on it, right? Though obviously I voted for both Sams and Strums, so I was double dipping a little bit. I didn't have a problem with 2 Orlando Pride players being on that list. Going to Dahl Kemper, maybe you call it recency bias, but I thought her transfer to BFC was one of the most dynamic moves of the entire season, really changed things for them. Kaylee Kurtz is one of the most consistent defenders, consistent players in the whole league. And I went Davidson for Gotham. I think people were talking about Emily Sonnet as a possibility as well. I know Davidson's availability has been spotty at times this year, but she is in charge of Gotham's distribution in a way that Emily Sonnet isn't as consistently. So Davidson not only has to handle some of the defensive stuff, but when she is on the pitch, she is the quarterback. She is the one setting play, setting distribution. And so that greater responsibility as a part of a great defense gets that vote from me. But I do think, again, Girma McCowan, great options, really, really good options. I think Girma, like she's won it twice. She's a very good defender. McCowan is a recent defender center back, so maybe that gets extra votes for people of that sort of extra weight of she is a conversion and she's been incredible as a conversion. For me, Emily Sams is defender of the year. That's why I put her on my MVP list as well. But again, this is the one where the absence of a Gotham player does stand out to me. Speaking of Gotham players, moving on to goalkeeper of the year. The finalists for goalkeeper of the year were Anne-Katrin Berger, Mandy Hott, and Anna Morehouse. My list was exactly the same. Those are my top 3 in the preliminary round. AKB gets my number 1 vote. I think it's not only just impact signing. Kind of if you look at her goals added, her plus minus on when she's on the pitch versus before when she was on the pitch for Gotham. I know that she is behind a good defense, but she makes fewer mistakes than Morehouse. And you see what she's able to do on penalty kicks, some of the mentality stuff that she's able to provide for that team. That just gave her the edge over Morehouse for me. And then Mandy Hott, and there are other players like this on my list. Mandy Hott gets that kind of great player with a rough team vote, where she's been very, very good despite Utah, especially in the first half of the season, really struggling with their defense. The attention she's getting from the U.S. Women's National Team is a really good example of just how much of her fundamentals are there. I think it's very interesting that she went from a championship winning team to more of a basement team, especially again in that first half of the season, that expansion team. Very consistent. Her fundamentals are very good. I think she has the mentality to be an incredible keeper in this league. So she actually was second for me. I went AKB, Mandy Hott, and Anna Morehouse third, but all 3 fabulous seasons. Midfielder of the year. This is a brand new award, and I think this is where brains start to break a little bit. I think that I like that they pulled midfielder out for a number of reasons. One being that I think if you've ever voted for the best 11 for the NWSL, you know that they give you 6 slots and they say write a forward or a midfielder. So you have to kind of have that responsibility yourself to be like, am I doing this positionally or am I just going down who I think had the best seasons? Sometimes that can be pretty attacker heavy because those stats are a little bit easier to parse out. Not surprisingly, midfielder of the year went very attacking this year with their finalists. There was Croy Bethune, Vanessa DiBernardo, Lola Bonta, Marta, and Ashley Sanchez. My ballot was actually fairly similar. I had DiBernardo, Marta, Rose Lavelle, Hina Sagita, and Croy Bethune. Croy Bethune, I added on there because, again, I like a balanced ballot. We're going to get there, but she is my rookie of the year. I don't think it's fair for me to say that my rookie of the year is not also one of my top 5 midfielders of the year. That doesn't make any sense, right? So I had her on there. She was 5th on my particular ballot. I think with the choices available to me in this finalist group, I'm probably going to say DiBernardo, Marta, Sanchez, Labonta, and then Bethune. I really thought both Rose Lavelle and Hina Sagita were fantastic this year. This is another one where you say, feels kind of notable that there's no Gotham player here. I think that the Gotham midfield, and this was reflected in my best 11, front to back was very good. And that is interesting because it hasn't really been a great year for defenses. It hasn't really been a great year for defensive midfields. And I felt like Gotham was one of the most balanced possible options. And I had Neely Martin on my best 11 for that reason, because I wanted to put a defensive midfielder in there. And I think this category opens up maybe just a lot of priors for people. I think you're going to see a lot of people voting for Marta. I think that makes a lot of sense. She's on the MVP list. She was on my list for midfielder of the year. I just think DiBernardo is one of the purest midfielders in the entire game, has been for years and years and years. I think that she is a really good example of why this award should exist. And so for her being number 1 there, that is just, that's how I feel. I think that Vanessa DiBernardo should win midfielder of the year, because of sort of that unique correlation between that this award coming into existence at the same time that she, just in sort of a pure midfield fashion, has been incredible for Kansas City. Rookie of the year. Again, keep it rolling. Rookie of the year. The three finalists are Croy Bethune, Claire Hutton, and Ali Sentnor. I was slightly off the beaten path here. This is where I threw a vote in for someone that I wasn't sure was going to make it. You only get three options. I did vote for Bethune and Sentnor, but I also voted for Emma Sears, just a player on a little bit of a lower profile team who, as we know, had a very good year this year. My ballot is Bethune, Sentnor, and then Hutton. I think the Croy Bethune sort of quandary is one that everyone is going to be discussing, which is for the first 2/3 of the regular season in the NWSL, she was absolutely the front runner for Rookie of the Year. But then she doesn't play after late August, so she misses like that final third of the season. Did she play enough? Does 2/3 of a Croy Bethune season hold up against the entire season of some of these other players? I say that her attacking stats say yes. She finished the season as the assist leader. She tied the single season assist record. We also saw someone like Sentnor also miss time this season. She played in the U20 World Cup, so she missed a number of regular season games to go do that with the United States. Hutton, to me, is more of a fabulous piece to the larger Kansas City puzzle. And so I voted for Bethune. And again, I balanced that. I kind of had it in different places. She was in my top 5 midfielders. I think the injury made it tighter, but it didn't change the ultimate decision for me. But I think Sentnor fully deserving of being on this short list. Again, kind of like Hot. You sometimes have to add additional weight to someone playing that well on a team that struggled for as much as they did. And that's sort of similar to me with Sears. And then for Hutton, I think the fact that she just looks like a natural in a team that plays that's such a free-flowing attack. And we talk about some of the amazing players that she's playing around, just not missing a beat. So yeah, great year for rookies, actually. And it is too bad that Bethune missed a certain portion of it, but I don't think her winning this award, in my mind, takes anything away from the way other rookies have played. I just think that what she did was so incredible and they held up, right? So I did have to go with Bethune. For Coach of the Year, last one here, Coach of the Year. The finalists were Juan Carlos Amoros, Latko Andonovski, and Seb Hines. That was my list. Exactly the same. My final ballot is the same as what my preliminary ballot was I put Seb Hines first, then Andonovski, then Amoros. Turning things around means a lot to me. I mean, Amoros run it last year, right? Like when anyone who can take a team from struggling to playing very well and making kind of, that push towards a shield or towards playoff goes a long way for me. The fact that I think Orlando and Kansas City and Gotham all play some of the most attractive soccer. I think the Washington tag team also didn't help them with the award, where they had an interim manager for like the first half of the season, and then they had their permanent manager come in the second half of the season. Hines is my Coach of the Year. I think just holistically, you have to look at it as, it's not necessarily a worst to first in a classic sense. You would actually say Andonovski was much closer in terms of where Kansas City was last year versus where they were this year. But what Seb Hines did year over year was incredible. It's the best team in the league. They play with a very clear style. There's a lot of personality management there. Like there are many stars on that team, and the management of those many stars has been very good. I also really respect a coach that can work in players that have been with the team for a long time. Players that were drafted by the team in the last couple of years. You look at like maybe how well Summer Yates has played for the Orlando Pride, or the fact that you've got Julie Doyle playing so well, or the fact that you've got Emily Sams coming in and kind of stepping forward and becoming that defender of the year after a number of years, a young player. Then you have a mainstay like Marta, the fact that you have this new star coming in like Barbara Banda. I think that Orlando put it all together and had to manage not only some of the challenges of an emerging team, but also some of the challenges of what turned out to be kind of a superstar team. Andonovski, similar to me. There's a lot of personalities on that Kansas City team. They did not play very well last year. They look so much better this year. The utilization of Chawinga goes a long way for me. Andonovski, I think, has done a wonderful job. And then Amoros also gets, he was on my short list as well, because I think his task this year was very different than his task last year. Last year, it was more of a let's turn things around. Let's implement a championship mindset. Let's figure out a style of play that's easily replicable week after week. Let's go in with that sort of like shark mentality, full team defending, basic principles, and then go from there. But this year it was the super team, right? This year you've got a coach that has to manage U.S. Women's National Team stars and people who star for Spain, and they had injuries that affected them, right? Mitch Purse goes down at the very beginning of this season. He's been able to utilize players that Gotham has had for a long time, like, again, Neely Martin or Delaney Sheehan. I just think that his ability to put that whole cauldron together and have it come out with a team that I think has a real shot at the championship going back to back is very impressive. So really 3 wonderful coaching jobs. Hines first, then Andanoff, then Amoros. So with all of that, big ballots, big individual awards, I'm curious what you guys think. I'm curious if anyone has any major differences, if you have any different snubs that you think were missed, if you have anybody who you think shouldn't have been on these lists, or if you think I'm crazy with any of my short lists. But again, like I said, because my lists were just not too much different than how things shook out, I think that we're closer to a consensus this year than maybe in past years. But let's talk about the games. So the semifinal games, we've already gone deep on styles of play. I think those are going to continue. We also are getting to the point, I keep saying this in like late rounds, knockout rounds. Style of play is really interesting. You watch soccer for it, but what really matters is who's going to win, right? This is about making it to the championship. Everyone's hurting a little bit. No one's fully healthy. Everyone's tired. You're just hitting the grind to make it all the way to the end. We're going to have Orlando versus Kansas City. Really nice little rivalry going there. And then Gotham versus Spirit. I expect the styles of play to hold generally. I think Kansas City is going to let Orlando hold the ball and hit on the counter with Chua. I think they're going to utilize, again, their speed going the other way as a way to keep Orlando really honest. I think Washington is also going to take that approach with Gotham. I think Washington's going to sit off ball slightly more and let Gotham hold it. I just do think that is the game plan against Gotham. We saw Portland use it last week and almost be able to get into extra time against them. So I think that we are going to see sort of some of that holding the ball and some of that counterattacking football. I think that those, again, basic principles are going to stand. But then you get into some of the intangibles of like fitness concerns, right? Temwa Chawinga, she emptied the tank at the end of that quarterfinal against North Carolina. I worry that is almost going too far. That's where the utilization of an incredible player like that, you go, yes, I think sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to get through a game, but also how do you pay for that in the following weeks? Washington similarly had to give pretty much everything to get past Bay FC last week in extra time. You saw Trinity Rodman go down with some of that back discomfort that held her out for a number of weeks this season. It seems possible they'll be getting some players back, but it's not really guaranteed. I just think that Washington, they should be like, I feel bad for them because I think the fact that they made it this far is a showing of their depth, but how much more can they go to that well? I'm very bad at these predictions. I think that this is where it gets kind of tough because all of these teams are very, very close in quality. But I'm gonna flip the script a little bit. Last week I said, or even earlier this week, talked about how counterattacking football can be the way to go and knock out single elimination. You force the other team to be perfect and you pounce on their mistakes. I'm gonna flip the script though and give the semifinal to the ball possessors here. I'm gonna say that Orlando is going to deny Kansas City space. I think that defense is going to hold. I think we're going to hopefully see, defense wins championships, and Orlando has always talked about how they feel like their defense was a little bit underrated. They're going to see the defense hold here for Orlando against Kansas City. Kansas City is not going to be able to respond with the heavy legs that they have. And then I also think Gotham has just enough juice to hold off the Spirit. I think that also is going to be a very close game. I think that Washington's counterattacking capabilities are going to really test the way Gotham, again, holds that high line, the way that they let players get in behind with a whole, you're holding that offside trap. You're using numbers to cut off entry passes. I think it's going to be a really interesting duel between these two teams. But I think Gotham's going to have just enough. I think Gotham is going to be back in a championship game, and I think they're going to be playing Orlando. Now, we'll see. Like I said, I think sometimes the more reactive style of play is easier to pull off in a single elimination game, and especially in an NWSL game where high transition can sometimes be teams' bread and butter. But I feel like this has just been the season of that sort of overall quality winning out. And I know that Gotham over Washington would technically be an upset, but with the way Gotham has been playing in the latter half, or even just the latter quarter of the regular season, the way they handled Portland, which was a tricky game, and just the fact that Washington looks like they're having to really push boundaries physically to get through some of this stuff, I think it's going to be Orlando and Gotham at the end. So this has been today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. We will see y'all next week at Championship. We're going to have more NWSL to talk about next week. We're going to have, I'm sure, a wide variety of other topics to discuss. I can't wait. This is like the apex of the women's soccer calendar in the United States. We're all going to be there. You're going to see a bunch of JWS people there. If you're there, please say hi, because next week is the big party week, and I cannot wait.